I'm Vic Perri, and welcome to our vodcast, brought to you by Living Positive Victoria, the Australian Research Centre in Sex, Health and Society, and the Alfred Hospital Education Resource Centre. I'm a Health Promotion Officer with Living Positive Victoria, and joining me today is Jennifer Power, Coordinator of the HIV Futures Survey at La Trobe University, and Graham Brown, who's the Research Fellow a Research Fellow at La Trobe University. So today what we're going to do is look at the, overall wellbeing and quality of life with people with HIV. So before we go into specifics, can you just give us a bit of a background to the survey, Jen?
Yeah, thanks Vic. So HIV Futures is Australia's longest running national survey of people living with HIV. So it's a study that we started at ARCSHS at La Trobe in 1997. And the timing really was that post-introduction of highly active antiretroviral therapy had just become available in Australia, and we were interested in tracking health and wellbeing, quality of life, relationships, life experiences of people living with HIV in this kind of new era of treatments. So we did the first survey in 97. We've repeated it 8 times since then, most recently in 2016. So the data we're talking about today is from HIV Futures 8, which was the 2016 survey.
So with this latest survey, what does it actually tell us about how people are travelling with their HIV in terms of overall health and wellbeing and quality of life?
Look, it tells us that people are travelling really well, actually, which is what we expected. People report really good physical health overall, really good general well-being, which is emotional, physical health kind of combined. The very good news is that gets better with age. So people moving into their 60s are reporting much higher levels of general well-being. The less good news is that overall physical health, self-reported physical health, so what people are telling us about their health, is lower than the Australian average. But we might expect that because the age range is quite wide in HIV Futures, but we did hear from quite a few people aged over 50. So that does incorporate age-related
issues.
Aging, yes, as well as HIV-related issues. But the other thing that was really quite pronounced was mental illness, mental health problems. So we absolutely had a significantly higher level of reported anxiety and depression among our sample than what we'd see in the general population. And that's something we've seen pretty consistently, actually, over the years.
So with HIV, I guess what is it, Graham, about HIV and the impact that it has on people's wellbeing and overall quality of life?
It's interesting because we can compare some of those results, as Jen has to some extent, to say living with other chronic illnesses. So certainly as Jen said, the Futures study is really about that, or the time it's been running has really been about that move of HIV moving into, for a lot of people, what is an ongoing managing of a chronic illness. But there's elements with HIV that do make it very different. Unlike most chronic illnesses, we know that it has a very direct impact around relationships, sexual relationships and so on. Has a very different flavours around stigma and so on and so forth. And also has a big impact in the history of HIV around isolation. So we have a lot of people, say older people with HIV, who lost a lot of their friends and networks and peer group around them. And we also have a lot of people with HIV that many years ago didn't think they would actually be fortunate enough to be living this long, and so really planned their lives around that. So there's a lot of quite complex other aspects there that then flow on to, I suppose, impact around quality of life, expectations, resilience, hope for the future and so forth.
Well, talking about quality of life, because quality of life, because it's more than just about surviving life. So what is it, how does HIV impact on quality of life, in terms of a social context, etc.?
Well, there's a couple of good examples. I mean, one example to look at is the way, say, stigma around HIV impacts on people's lives. And it's an interesting dynamic. We know that, as Jen was saying, certainly with mental health and well-being, there's 2 aspects here. One, people living with a chronic illness. For a lot of people with HIV, the treatments we know are hugely better, far fewer side effects and so forth. But there's still a certain element of fatigue that comes in when anyone is trying to manage their life and a chronic illness and all of the social issues and so forth that can have over and above the impact on the body. But on top of that with HIV then is the issue of around managing stigma, for example. And it's quite complex. So as an example, someone who is in a very safe position within their work and their family and very able to be open about their HIV status and is feeling very supported through peer networks and so on, can actually experience or have, I suppose, see a lot of stigma discrimination or experience that, but is feeling very strong and resilient and able to manage that and actually has fairly limited impact on their life directly. Whereas someone who is not in a safe space and isn't able to disclose their status, their family around them, they don't know other people with HIV to get that kind of peer support and so on. It's interesting with HIV where we can certainly look at the experience generally that people can have when managing a chronic illness, whatever that illness is. And we know that people can, their health and the sort of health indicators can be very strong and really good, but there's still that element of an ongoing management of chronic illness which impacts on just the fatigue of worrying about aspects like that, relationships, a whole range of things that can impact on. With HIV, it's that, but also some unique aspects as well. A good example with HIV might be, so certainly HIV has other impacts on relationships around fear and concern around transmission. It has fear and concern around stigma and discrimination that's actually unrelated to the illness, but or is not rational, should we say. Discrimination is not rational and so on, but still happens in people's lives. And I think stigma is an interesting example because we know that if someone's living with HIV but is in a really safe place, and what I mean by that is they've got good peer support, they've got a family around them or close friends that support them, their workplace isn't discriminatory, those sorts of things. If that's around them, they can actually be quite open about HIV status and may actually see and experience more stigma, but is actually resilient enough to be able to deal with that. They've got support structures around them and it impacts much less on their quality of life. Whereas someone, for example, that is not in a safe place is needing to not disclose their HIV status for safety reasons or to maintain their job or a whole range of things, then that means they're actually trying to maintain that security by themselves over a long period of time. That has a big impact on issues around isolation, around fatigue and so forth, and certainly, as Jim was saying, can have a big impact around mental health generally. So stigma is quite an unusual and unique way in HIV because of a lot of its history. We've also got aspects where, again, physical health might be really good, but for, say, a lot of our people living with HIV who were diagnosed many years ago may have actually lost a lot of their peer group to AIDS. And so that experience, it's not just the fact that a lot of friends die, but then maybe much later in their life and don't actually have the support structure that many other people might take for granted.
And beyond that too, I think a lot of, certainly people who've been living with HIV for a longer time, potentially also changed their career when they were diagnosed, potentially became unwell for a while, potentially lost their income base. So we certainly saw, we found a much lower average income among the HIV Futures sample than what we'd see in the Australian population. So it also compared to education, so higher education levels, but lower average income. So I do think that's kind of showing the impact.
So that's interesting in terms of income, and that's people who do have an income. There is a disproportionate number of people who are on disability support pensions, aren't there?
Yeah, it's quite high. It's difficult for us to tell if that's because we've captured people who are more connected with services who might be more unwell and so therefore more likely to be on a disability support pension, or if that's the general structure or experience of that population.
And then taking that into account, obviously, what about, say, the poverty line? Is there a certain number of people that are still living below the poverty line, and is that higher than the general population?
Certainly in HIV Futures, we've consistently found that we have quite high numbers of people who are living on very low incomes. And we certainly found that among women particularly, but in general as well. And
that, I think it's important to, the element there of the risks that people, say, on a lower income might be needing to manage around disclosure in workplace environments, that what they're risking around disclosure might be quite different to someone who's in a much more either affluent or more secure position. And so it's not just the, I suppose, quality of life of what you can afford or not, but the impact that broader social stigma can have, and what, how much confidence you've got to actually to do things. Certainly what we've found, so a lot of my research around the peer support, and certainly a lot of the research shows that people with HIV that have connection or know other people living with HIV has a really big, I suppose, contribution to feeling confident about managing and so forth, quite independent of income, age, and so forth. That doesn't necessarily mean that other people with HIV are their closest friends in the whole network of people with HIV in that sort of sense, but simply that element of I'm not managing this alone, I'm doing pretty well, and others are, I suppose, tackling and succeeding with similar problems that I'm challenged by.
And we raised that point in another podcast where we covered stigma and the impact on disclosure, where a person who knows that they're not on their own, who are connected to other people with HIV, can have a huge impact on their confidence in dealing with HIV, which in turn has an impact on their well-being, for both physical and mental well-being.
I think it's a really important point, though, when we talk about the treatment of mental health problems. So there's very much this social basis, there's a context in which people living with HIV might experience poorer well-being. Whether or not the mental health sector is on top of that, I don't know, but often mental illness is treated in a sector that might not know, or by specialists who might not know a lot about HIV. So it is a question in some ways of bringing together or bringing knowledge into the mental health sector.
All right, well, thanks guys. That wraps up another discussion on HIV and in particular wellbeing and overall quality of life. And thanks Jen and thanks Graham, and make sure that you check out our other podcasts on a range of other topics. I'm Vic Perri, thanks for watching.